So hello and welcome back to my channel. So let us look at this video of Dr. Arikan talking about how French, they were forced their former colony in Africa to sign a bill or a policy to say that we can allow French country to stay in our countries. We can allow them to have military based and military personnel in our country. You allow French to do anything in your country, especially the dirty work. So you are signing that document or that policy to allow them to do anything to you, and there will be no non-alignment to any country. Everything must be faced to Europe. So let us look at this video and we'll come back with our commentary. Let's watch.
We were way ahead of them in our civilization. They set out to destroy us. And Berlin Conference put the nail on that coffin. So they gave Djibouti the same sovereignty as the United States. They gave Burundi the same sovereignty as China. They gave Togo. You see, the EU realizes individual little countries, they can't survive on the world stage. So they come together as the European Union. Now picture this now. So they cut up this Africa into the tiny little countries, small economies that could never survive on their own, but gave them the same sovereignty as the big boys. So that way, when the little bitty countries go to the world stage for the purposes of development and discussing trade, they're wannabe boxers who are being thrown into the heavyweight boxing ring every day. How do you put China in the same boxing ring with Eswatini? Eswatini has 1.2 million people. China has 1.4 billion people. And you put them on the same stage and say, go at it, negotiate. Are you with me? Yes. This is insanity of the highest order. How have we allowed this carnage to go on? When Eswatini is thrown in the same boxing ring with China and Eswatini collapses before Eswatini even gets on the stage, the world says, well, Eswatini, what's wrong with you? Why can't you take care of your people? Well, China came in and said, Eswatini, give me all your gold or else. And if Eswatini does not agree, they just go on next door to Lesotho and give Lesotho an extra $1. And if Lesotho doesn't take it, they just jump on to Togo, Central African Republic. It was all by design. 1884. They did something else in addition to chopping us up. They also set out to make the African believe that everything African was bad and undesirable, and everything Western, particularly French and British, was more desirable. We call that the legacy of colonization. Prior to that, they had started long working on the slaves. Make them think everything about them, forget anything about Africa. Where you come from is a horrible place, diseased and dying people, constantly at war with themselves, uncivilized. Cut out any communications with them. You need to just know what we tell you. And we call that the legacy of slavery. So that's where you look at where we are today. 135 years later, a system that was put in place to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated, that Africa is forever exploited, remains in place today, alive and well. And we sit here and we ask ourselves, why isn't Africa moving forward? Why does Africa continue to be taken advantage of? Well, I'll tell you why, very simply. Until Africa comes together as a continent speaking with one voice, one continent, one people, nothing, and I repeat, nothing is gonna change. As individual little African countries, we are wannabe boxers. We will never make it fighting against the heavyweights. We must speak with one voice. Yeah. And this is exactly what our Pan-African leaders wanted to see happen in 1963 when they came together in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. They clearly stated that Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, and that African Union was now. They said Africa must speak with one voice. It is the only way for Africa to take its rightful place on the world stage. Sadly, when they went to Addis Ababa in 1963, they were divided. We had two factions, the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group. The Casablanca group were saying Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, and African Union now. This was Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Only 7. The other 25 of the 32 who attended were the Monrovia group. They were the nationalists. They said, let's go slow. Let's kind of wait on this Pan-African thing. 55 years later, 56 this year, we're still going slow. As if it wasn't bad enough that we were divided up into the tiny little countries that we are today. The gift that Berlin Conference gave us. One other thing that France did between 1958 and 1961 in the name of giving us our independence as African countries. France forced the Francophone, and I hate that terminology. There is no such thing as Francophone, Anglophone. They made it up. But for the purposes of communication, I will use that. 14 of those countries, they said, in order for you to get your independence from us, you must sign this document. You thought they could have found a better name for the document. The document was called the Pact for the Continuation. I repeat, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. We are talking about giving you independence, but sign this pact for the continuation of colonization in a different format. And I'm going to highlight some of those issues that they said you must agree to if you are going to be independent. Hello. Maybe we need to redefine the meaning of independence for the French. First, France said, you see, you monkeys, you don't know how to manage your money. We're going to demand that you deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the French Minister of Finance. Under the French Central Bank, under the control of the French Minister of Finance. France is then going to take your 85% bank deposits from each and every one of you. Deposit those funds in the French stock market under the French name. And you may or may not know the returns. Today, as we speak, the latest figures are saying for every 14 billion that France invests in the stock market from Africa, they are realizing upwards of 300 billion in return. Every year in, year out, because of these deposits from the African countries, France is taking out of Africa over $500 billion. Now, I
think this is the reason why Africa or African countries, they don't have veto rights in the United Nations, so that any policy that was implemented by the colonizers, it will not be overturned, meaning that the policy that they have implemented when these African countries gain independence, they are going to reverse it. Most of the African countries, they gain their independence long time, 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, but still they were not allowed to have the veto rights, it means that this colonialization, it will not end. It will not end. So that is where the problem is now.
For every 14 billion, the returns on the investment are over 300 billion, and they are taking over 500 billion. So in actuality, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars year in and year out from us poor people, Africans. Back to the pact. So should you want to access some of your money that you have deposited with France, you have to submit your country's financial returns. And if approved, you get to get it as a loan. You can only access up to 20% of your money year in, year out as a loan at commercial interest rates. Your own money. As if that was not enough. They said all your minerals discovered, yet to be discovered, all your oil discovered, yet to be discovered. France and French companies have the first right of refusal. If there's anything left over that the French companies do not want, your people might have. To this day. They said you will only use a currency that we created for you because you're special Africans. We call it the CFA. There was the Central African CFA and the Western African CFA, same animal. And that France is the only one that can print it for you. 1958. Fast forward. They're still printing it for us. And if you start misbehaving, they just stop printing your money. And your country's in trouble. They also said your language of instruction shall be French, whether you like it or not. That France will have military presence in your country. That your military can only be trained by France. That you can only buy military equipment from France. That you cannot have any military alliance with your neighbor. And that in the event of war, your allegiance is only to France. And furthermore, because they have military presence in your country, they can invade you without notice should they feel that the interests of France in your country are being violated.
Teach, sister, teach. Speak on, sister.
Fast forward, 2019, nothing has changed. The same people who have the audacity to tell us that we are poor countries, they are taking trillions out of Africa every year. And what is the African doing? Like an obedient, programmed black man, we just give in. We know the facts, but we just do nothing about it.
We mind our business.
Now, you have to say some of the fears are real, because if France that has sold you inferior equipment to theirs, France that has trained your military to be inferior to their military, they are now in your country. They can invade you. They have the permission to do so. They can destabilize you. And then one might say, why is it that African leaders haven't done anything about this deplorable situation? Well, let me tell you, my brothers and sisters, they have tried. Documented to this day, 22 coups where leaders were assassinated. France had something to do with it. The first 7, when they decided they were pulling out of the CFA and that they're going to print their own money, they were assassinated. Every time an African leader has tried to do what's best for their country, they were assassinated. Majority of them aided by France. It's a known fact. And then others, they were just mercenaries who felt that when there was a natural resource discovered in one country, they wanted to create a coup. So while the country is thrown into a civil war, they're siphoning the natural resource.
So yes, they have come up with the lines dividing the continent according to the wealth of this continent. But for the European to be industrialized, because they have invaded the African continent. If it was not the Berlin Conference that they have sitting for almost 3 months to discuss, plan, mastermind on how to conquer Africa, then that line that have been put in place to divide the continent according to the skin color of the people that are living on those continents. But we know for the fact that for these countries, for the Europeans and the USA to be developed is because of Africa. So as much as we wanted to understand how this world functions, sometimes you feel like, no, this is too much. The pressure of our African leaders. You can see them smiling. But the pressures that they are going through, for them to be forced to sign this policy, is a matter of life and death, as Doctor explained. It's a matter of life and death because if they have refused, and mind you that this policy, normally when they are brought into your countries, they have sugar on top. And the rest you cannot even chew. For sustainability, development of your country. But the reason why they keep on coming to Africa is not to develop Africa. It's not to develop Africa. As long as the African countries, they don't have that veto rights in the United Nations, they don't have that veto rights. And everything that African they are trying to do, it has to do with that veto rights. Because there will be no a country in Europe that will just come up and say, African, I want to tell you the secret. This is how maybe German, they were trying to exploit you. No. They are part and parcel of these shenanigans that they have planned against the African continent. They are in the same group. They are in the same group. So we should not be fooled. So we should not be fooled that this one is not, this one is not. Even when it's come to the market, most of the African countries, we are non-aligned countries. These are communist, these are capitalist, these are socialist. But even the socialists, they cannot allow Africa to develop. They won't. As long as they are also living above that line to say the skin color of these people that are living on this side, they cannot come down to Africa and rescue these people from all their problems that we have brought them. We are not equal. So let us look at how the Berlin Conference has affected the African continent and the Caribbeans. So by the time we understand how the Berlin Conference was structured, because their aim, when they went to sit in Berlin Conference, they started dividing the African countries among themselves. That's why you'll find a country that maybe was first colonized by Germany, and Germany, they have to hand over to Britain, or the first colonizer to come into that country, maybe they are Italians, and followed by Spanish. So they were giving each other chances to exploit the natural resources in Africa. That's why you find a country being colonized by 2 countries or 3 or more countries from Europe. But the main reason that I have looked at as an aggressive, and really where they even shown that they don't care with African. The first white settler to come to Cape Colony, it was in 1680 something. The first white settler to enter Cape Colony was in 16th centuries. But the Berlin Conference was in 1884 to 1885, because they were sitting for 3 months. So when we look at the time frame from the white settlers, they have been living in the continent, supposed to be maybe 200 or 300 years. But the Berlin Conference, the German, the Russians, the Spanish, the Belgium, the French, the USA, the United Kingdom, they want to tell us as African that if they are going to sit and discuss Africa, and most of their fellows, they have been on the continent for so many years, but they did not even invite one of the African leaders or representative to represent the African in their meeting. They did not invite any, meaning that these people, they have no regards. They don't have any respect when it's come to the African leaders. I don't know this time around if it's the same, but it's supposed to be the same because we are still the same people that are living on the continent. They did not invite anyone. And their main reason, for me, it was the land. The white settlers, they have been on the continent for so many years, and they managed to occupy a lot of land, fertile lands. So now they have to come up with this meeting so that they can start to cement their presence on the continent, and to make sure that this land that was occupied by the white settler, they will legalize them as theirs, and nobody should question them. So, like, we have to mind our business. When you see them walking there, you don't have the right to ask them, because they are on their farms. That is their land. That's why they came up with this aggressive colonialism, or this aggressive corporal punishment, because the black people, they were resisting. They started to resist so bad because the Berlin Conference has really destroyed the African people. Imagine that they were discussing that we should not consider the borderlines. If I feel like my British people, they have to extend this borderline to the north. So that's how it should be. So you now, the native or the indigenous of that country, if you are coming up and said, no, the borders are on this line, should you go back? No, that borderline should stand. That's why we are having these borders where you find tribes, they were divided. So they were divided intentionally. It's not that these people, they don't know what they were doing. They know what they were doing. They don't care with the borderlines. So there will be a free movement between Niger River on this side and on this side. The trade between the Congo Basin, Like maybe the Congo Basin, we know what is in DRC. They are very rich. So they must open all the routes, whether in the air, on the rivers. So they must be, all this place must be accessible to them, so that they must create routes when they want to siphoning these mineral resources. It's only the land, the Congo Basin, the Niger River, and apparently the other one is the white people. They must make sure they... No. The white people, they must make sure they protect the indigenous. Point number 3 is that they make sure that the white people, they must protect the black people or the black community. Protect the black community from whom? How can the white settlers protect the black people? From whom? Who brought the guns into the continent? Even though African, we were civilized then. Yes, we were civilized. But because the continent is having a vast of empty land, doesn't mean that we were not civilized. It was not like that. But for them to put this point to say the white people, they must make sure they protect the black people, no, that was nonsensical, very nonsensical. We were colonized for so many years. Our forefathers, grandfathers, our fathers took up arms to fight against this white skin. Have a policy that was signed in Berlin Conference to protect the black people. But our fathers, they took up arms against these people. So what kind of protection that they were protecting black people? And from whom they were protecting black people? If the black people, they started to resist them. And that's why now finally they brought out guns to suppress the majorities. We have a lot of battlefield that our ancestors, they were fighting against these people. So if there was a sort of protections, the battlefield that our ancestors and our fathers have fought, they were not supposed to be in an existence. But there is no way an African will not resist for someone who came from wherever they came from. And now these are the people that they want to rule over you. These people, they started or they wanted to rule you because of the color of their skin, because of their supremacy. They find us having our own God. They find us having our own Bible. They find us having our ways of living, making our own bread with our traditional millets. This kind of toxic food that they brought us. So what are they talking about? Sometimes when you think of how the Western countries hated an African, it's very sickening. It's very much sickening. Imagine French forcing its colony to sign a policy so that they can remain in their countries. And if you guys, you don't want to go their way and take your national broadcast and announce that this president is not good for the people, then we have to replace him with this general for a while. That is cool. And which people are they talking about? Because normally they can come into a country in a democratic countries or in a democratic countries where people they have votes or people they have elected their leaders. But just because their interest they were not saved, or maybe that particular leader doesn't want to continue with the interest of French being in their country, then they will come up with a plan to remove that president and say, now, yeah, look at these people, they are starving, you are not giving your people the electricity, you are not doing this. But how can the country service its own people if French is taking so much from these people? You take out their money, they must bank in French if they want their money back. So this money is coming in the form of a loan with the interest again back to French. No, this is very nonsensical. And I think they deserve to be removed, because now the coups that are happening in Western countries or in Western African countries, it's like really these people, they are very tired. They are very much tired of the French being in their countries. In their countries, there is nothing moving. Because most of the French countries, really, if we look at them, their economies is not really performing, because their boss is the one who can decide if you need this money, or we can keep you in that situation for 10, 15 years. You are doing well. But again, one thing I have learned from these former colonies, why Germans, they are not having this a lot of hiccups with their former countries in Africa. I stand to be corrected. If Germans have invaded, or if Germans try to involve in former colonies in Africa, where they really try to evade or try to have a coup against that country. So I want one to comment in the comment section, mention one country, because I don't understand the madness that is with French. The madness that French has or have against these French colonies. This is crazy. It's a total madness. Why French can't allow the former colonies to start governing on their own, start luring themselves without his involvement. So now we are going to have a situation like in Mali, where they have decided to chase them out, have finally chased out the French, and they call in the USA. The USA, they build a military base there, and get tired of the Americans, and now they call in some expert from Russia again to train them. But even though they have promised these people that the Russians expert, they are going back, who knows? So the way these guys, they are trying to meddling in the affairs of these countries is too much. But my question is there any political willings where a nation can come up or stand and call one another within Africa and said, as long as these people, they don't want to give us the veto rights, as long as this company, they were mistreating the Tanzanian, but when the Tanzanians, they are demanding this from accountability from this company from Europe, they refused. I think they must not be given the right and the permission to operate in an African countries, because this habit of them, it will continue. They will not stop. But again, the way our African leaders, they are also behaving. I put blame on them, but I'm not blaming them. As long as I understand that most of the blames is not on our African leaders. They are going through a lot, lobbying these Western countries to stop the mistreatments of the Africans, or to start respecting the Africans. They have no choice. They don't have a choice. Because if the African or one of the African countries was allowed to be industrialized, but none of the country in Africa is industrialized. The oils that are being discovered in Africa, the companies that are coming to drill in is from Europe. It's from Europe. But the African, they need to stand up and speak in one voice, facing the North Pole, and tell them what they want. I think in that way, they are going to respect us. Or a new generation that will come and say, enough, this is a new generation. We are not going to take that. We can trade with one another. But if I told you that this one, I don't like it, please don't cross this line. So I think at these centuries, we need those leaders. But as long as our liberation struggle, there are still rulings, we need them to guide us so that they can give us this history for us to make sure that we make a better decision when it's come to dealing with them, because there are situations that are also not documented in the books. At least the painful story of French and the policy that they were put in place in Berlin Conference should be abolished so that they can allow the African countries to govern themselves. So that's what I have for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you have watched up to this far, consider yourself subscribing to the channel, like the video, and turn on your notification so that you can be notified whenever I upload a new video, and leave your comment down below, please, so that we can continue with the conversation in the comment section. See you on my next one. Bye-bye and bye.